Thank you very much. Thank you for coming to this talk. And obviously this is a common problem you guys have had. Old website, nobody wants to touch it because you don't know what's going to break. So Behat helps there. So in this talk I'm going to address these topics. What is Behat? How do you get started with it? How do you write tests? And how do you write good tests? And then we, if time permits, we look at some common problems. If I may not finish all the slides, but just get the slides afterwards. And there are lots of things in there that will help you with things you will immediately encounter when you start with Behat. The main book is the Cucumber book. It describes this kind of testing methodology, initially developed for Ruby, and later ported to PHP. So Behat allows you to test the entire website. It sees it as a visitor would see it, so you test through the actual browser. And the techie definition of Behat is PHP framework for auto-testing your business expectations. So let's get started with that. So a bit of a live demo here. I'll fire up Behat here with my first test, so you can see how it actually works. There's a couple of steps and actually fires up a real browser. Chrome puts up this notification at the top that is being controlled, but that's what Behat allows you to do, drive an actual browser. So what does the test look like? So this is the test I did just run. So there's that scenario, user logs in as administrator, a couple of steps, I go to the homepage, I log in, fill my username password, I press login, and then I should be on a particular page, and I should see member 4. So let's run that quickly again. So maybe you see it now actually going. Indeed, I am on the user/1 page, and indeed I see member 4 text on this page. If everything is okay, all these expectations are being met, Behat will actually at the end say how many tests you did run and if they all passed. A bit similar to the PHP PHP unit test you saw previously if you attended the talk. So what's the goal here? Testing entire website as a visitor. You want to have readable tests, and they should be so readable that stakeholders, i.e. The people you're writing the website for can read it. These tests should be maintainable. If your test breaks all the time, you're not going to run it. And actually, we can promise something to the customer. These tests pass, therefore my website does at least this. Maybe not more, but at least this. And obviously, these tests are automated, so you can run them again and again and again after every change. So we're going to install something. I'll jump through this real quickly. Nicely, we don't have to click on all these agreements because it's all free software. It doesn't cost you anything to get started. We install this with Composer, read the slides for the details. The main important thing is that you want to have the master, the dev, the master branch. If you don't have it, lots of things will not work or not work as nicely. And then we initialize your test with the Behat dash test in it. So that creates two files, feature context, we'll talk about it later, and it creates a file called behat.yaml. That's a standard YAML file which looks like this, has all kinds of stuff in it which is not immediately important, but the ones in bold are the ones I want to talk about now. So we can choose your browser. You can work with Firefox or with Chrome. And the other thing you have to specify is the URL of your website, obviously, because hey, your test fires of the browser, where should it go? Okay, the other things you need for the magic, you need to have Selenium, which you run through Java, and you need a driver for your browser. That's browser specific, different driver for browser, different driver for Chrome. And that must be in your path, details in the slides, so read that later. That's all. And then we go back to our first feature. So how do we write it? The keywords are in bold, and these are basically the only keywords which are special. Every feature has multiple scenarios, and every scenario has, or one or more scenarios, and every scenario has one or more steps. So file starts with feature. You can have scenarios in there, scenarios of steps, and steps start either with given, when, or then. You can extend a step with and or but. This is called a gherkin language, and what we aim for when doing that is, it's a domain-specific language, but it needs to be business readable. That's the aim. I'll come back to that later. So more details when writing that feature. Feature is the keyword. Anything after that is just custom text. So it doesn't matter. Free format. I went a bit quick here, I think. I'm missing here one slide. But basically, the scenario has these steps in it. What you try to do here is get the system into a particular state. That is your given step. You poke it, when I do this, when I do that, and then I examine the new state. That is the then step. So given, we set up the context, when to interact, and then to check as a summary. So Cucumber doesn't, or Behat doesn't distinguish between these three kinds of steps. So you can mix them any order. But even though Behat doesn't distinguish, you should. We're talking about readable tests. So how do we actually run the test? We do that with Behat. And Behat can tell us what steps there are. In my feature file, I had these steps. When I fill in this, when I click on that, what steps are there? Let's have a bit of a look. When I run my Behat file with D for dump and then L, it gives me a whole list of built-in steps. And the built-in steps are, do I see a successful message? Or I can also filter specific steps with just a D and then some kind of text. So I could say D message. That shows me only the built-in steps which have message in them. Or if I do another one like click, then I get only the steps which have click in them. And one of them is, for example, when I click link. That is that step here. When I click that. But there are more. You can click links in a region, or we'll come to that later. So back to our login example. When I go to the homepage, when I follow login, and I fill in these things. If you look at that, repeating the login is very time consuming. If I have to do this for every feature or every scenario, because most of the time we're talking about users who are logged in, your test is going to be very, very long, and you're repeating yourself all the time. And as programmers, we know repeating, don't repeat yourself. That's the mantra. So how do we do that? A couple of methods. One is the background option in the feature file. A background is run before every scenario in that feature. Example, feature here is adding content, and we have a background to log in. When I go to user login and I log in, blah, 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 and then I have my scenario. Scenario is the administrator can actually add some content. So if I had multiple scenarios in this feature, the background gets run before every scenario. It's still a little bit wordy, so let's see if we can do better. The other problem is that obviously username and password are hard-coded in your test. That's not good either. So we have a second option, that is to use the Drupal driver, and that's the one you will be using most of the time. If you look at the behat.yaml, it had that Drupal extension bit in there, and one of the items under it was blackbox. The blackbox driver is the default one without any special permissions. But if we install the Drupal driver, we can now suddenly interact with Drupal. We can load nodes, we can save nodes, we can load users, save users, all in our own tests. The other option it gives you is the Drus driver. You can now actually run your test against a remote site through Drus. And if you have set up the proper aliases, Drus can actually log in remotely through SSH against a remote site and run anything Drus can do. So how do we install it? Again, with Composer, make sure you install the master branch, else lots of stuff in the store won't work. And then we can pick the driver in the behat.yaml. Below the black box, you simply specify which driver do we want, either Drupal or Drupal. Most of the time we will be using Drupal. Almost there. One additional thing you need in your feature file is API. So mark this as a special feature which needs API access, else you get a message at the bottom. So if we do that, we can write much better tests actually. The feature again, gain privileged access to site, but the scenario is way shorter. User logs in as admin, and we can have simply that step given I am logged in as administrator. That's a step that is provided by the Drupal extension, and it allows you to specify a role. What it does in the background, it creates some random username, random password, and keeps track of that and uses that to log in. And the administrator is then the role. So you can also use login as authenticated user or login as developer or whatever roles you intend to have on your website. So take a look at this, because we want to move to writing beta tests. So in beta tests, I'm writing your own steps. So we have this scenario here. We're still using the built-in steps, all these steps here. Given I'm logged in as an authenticated user, that is the built-in step, and I go to my profile page and I fill in the following. There's also a built-in step. You can actually specify a table, makes it a bit shorter, so you don't have to write when I fill in first name with Mr. and I fill in last name with tester. You can specify it a bit more readable this way through a table. That step there, when I fill in the following, is actually a custom step. It doesn't exist in the system if I write it like this. So given I'm logged in as an authenticated user and my profile has been filled in. So that is my new step which I want to write, which is going to replace everything I had there. And because we don't want to repeat ourselves if we want to have authenticated users with a profile. We could put this in a background, but that's not easily shareable between different feature files. And this reads way better, as way more maintainer. But Behat doesn't know about this. So what does it do? It generates a snippet. I'll explain what happens later. But what I wanted to show you is this bit. When I run a step which does not exist, Behat will tell you, did you do something wrong? You could have made a typo, or do you actually want to create your own step? And that's usually what we want to do. So I click 1, I create this snippet here, which I can then copy and paste into my own feature context file. It doesn't do anything yet, so it puts that throw pending exception in there. Let me go back to the next slide. This is the feature or the step it generates. It doesn't do anything, but the step of the feature, the scenario will now complete. So when I go back to what I had here and just undo my little change here, if I implement that snippet and run the test again, it actually says pending. So there's one test, one step you have written already, but you haven't implemented it yet. So how actually does that magic work? So writing these custom steps, and I flashed on the screen very quickly, but how does it work? They're written in PHP doc style comments, so it has to start with the double star, single star won't work. You write the definition keyword, given when then, and the text after the keyword is the pattern, like I do something with, and you can put in arguments in there. So how does that look like? This is an example from a built-in step. Given I'm logged in as a user with the roles. So the magic actually is that Behat matches these comments against the text in your feature file, just using regular expression matching, and finds then the function to execute. That's why you have that free format, that free text. You can write anything because you can write it a specific expression to match. And then below it follows the function. The name of the function is not important. And it gets as argument or as parameters any of the arguments you specified in your documentation comment. So, what could we do to implement that feature? Has my profile being filled in? Or the step, sorry, I mean. This particular step could read simply like, we click on that edit link because we're on the profile page, we fill in a couple of details, we press save, and we check for a success message. This is slightly abbreviated or needs a bit of magic to work, but I hope you get these the idea. So where did I get these names from? That is quite important. I mean, I come up with assert click. How did I do that? So if I again look at the description of click, you see that it matches everything with click. It gives me that special dump here and actually says, oh yeah, that particular step is defined in this class and it is this method. So I can actually use that. That's the same for a success message. If I search from my messages, I have that whole list. I could simply say assert message or assert this. And that allows me to write my own steps by looking, what existing steps are there, and I can build upon that. I can actually integrate at any level with Selenium and the backend with Mink. Usually it's helpful to use these built-in steps that make things easier, because if I didn't have for example, a press button, what I would need to do is find a button element on the page. I need to actually execute a click method on that element and make your code read a bit more concise. So, but yeah, what methods there are is outside the scope of this talk. So a summary, we use that the D option to find methods to actually call in our own steps. So that brings us to writing good tests. What we want to avoid is tests like this. Similar to that login example I had. Let's say I write a test for a Twitter site. You could write tests like, when I'm on the home page, I fill in this box with hello world and I press tweet. When I click reply, and then I fill in tweet your reply with my tweet, and I press reply, then reply should be one. It's very, very detailed. That's the mistake people often make when they start with Behat. They use these built-in steps, and you get these very long, unwieldy, unreadable tests. So what is a much better one is this scenario retweet. I simply write when I tweet hello world, and I reply to my last tweet with tweet 2, then the number of replies should be 1. Well, that's very readable. Obviously, I need to implement these steps, but that's the whole key in using Behat well, is writing your own steps. So your business people, stakeholders, they can write these features, these scenarios in their own language. But sometimes, short is good, but not always. So sometimes it is very helpful for stakeholders to see the long way, all these things. So would you sign up for this website? Would you actually comment on this website? We have, everyone knows these sites. The scenario is, I'm on a news article page. When I click comment, I should see you must be logged in. Okay. And I click on the create account, I need to fill in, I need to click, I'm not a robot, street sign, I missed one, not again, oh yeah, okay, I'm not a robot, fine. I wait for the confirmation email to arrive, I click on the link in the confirmation email, finally I can log in, the site doesn't remember where I was, so I need to find my original news article again. Finally I can comment. In that case, you appear to be very keen to comment. Sometimes it's handy to have these steps. How hard is it to actually participate on your site? And that helps sometimes to write them out. So as a goal, seldom use built-in steps. Write your own steps. Avoid brittle steps, which easily break. Especially these click, click, click. If you make a change in the flow, it breaks. All your tests suddenly break. That's why it's better to have them as a single step in your code. And write them in a clear language. So, and write them well. So don't write things like scenario. Given something, then. Now use that order. Given, put it in the state, poke it, look at the results. So how do you get your company to do Behat? Well, we do it like this. When a bug is reported, you write a test that replicates it, and then a test should fail. And that's what you would see. So your scenario 1 failed. The next is when a bug is fixed, then the test should pass. And that's you can apply it immediately to any existing site. Get started with your first test. Doesn't need to be a new site. Any existing site works well. But also for new sites, Gherkin has these 3 purposes. It's documentation. What does the site do? How does it do it? It's kind of a contract. When all tests pass, then we have that in the contract. That's the customer has to accept that everything works. And it helps you as a programmer because it yells at you when the code fails or needs to be written. And that's for new projects. So how do you do your new project? You write your scenarios, or your business analyst writes them. You implement all the steps as deferred, as we have seen before. Either let Behat generate the snippets. You have these throw pending definition in there. And then all your tests will run, but they will all say pending, pending, pending. And then you start implementing it. And when is the project done? When all steps pass. Easy. Very helpful for project managers. You know exactly where you are. We are 80% complete. And it also helps is in teams. I took this from the book. It's he writes about his experience. He writes these tests with business analysts, and they had faced a situation at the end of the project. I thought they were done. Things started, they found bugs, but what were these bugs? These were actually things that were not covered in a scenario. So the actually mistake is not that tests were not working. No, certain tests were not there. And because these business analysts had been helping writing these tests, they could actually understand, there were these corner cases, these edge cases, which we didn't cover, and that helped them as a team as well, because the business people could see, we helped you, but we actually didn't think about this. So that's why the project took a little bit longer, makes happier teams. And hopefully you get your business to write tests themselves, and your analysts, stakeholders, and you as a developer is to implement them and run them. Here's some common problems. I'll go through only a few of them actually. They're all in the slides. So, as you saw, running one test is simply Behat, and I name the test file. Sometimes you just want to run, this should be the other way around. Run a single feature, that's the first one. Run a single scenario, it's the second one. Then you specify the line number where the scenario starts. We have an option to transform certain values. If you look at line 6, this is about user needs to click a validation email. If we get that link from that email, what is that link? It can be different every time. User visits the first link in the email. That can be transformed. So we just write that in as our test. But you as a programmer write your logic. You could have a transform test there. So the first link in the last email gets matched, and then you return something which you captured earlier. Often, I cheated a bit. Normally you don't see the browser. So why did we see the browser when I did do the demo? Because I had a tag in there, JavaScript. Only for JavaScript, the browser comes up. The other thing where I cheated is my browser stayed open. You would often see that if you run the test, your browser closes immediately. It's very annoying during development, so I like to actually change my Behat slightly so the browser doesn't close. That's on line 6, line 5, simply comment that out. We can do certain things which are quite handy to do initialization code, tear down code. Because the other thing where I cheated is if you run Behat without what I did, it not only takes down the browser, it actually removes the user, and you end up with user has logged out, and you can't actually use the back button during development to poke back and see what has happened. So what I like to have is this call here. So remove any users that were automatically, or make sure any automatically created users are not removed. So I keep around, and I can actually still interact with my browser, and it's still open. Then we have these things. So when I want to access that user manager, I need to extend from raw Drupal contexts. That's something you simply got to do instead of the default. A couple of things where I simply skip over, which are not that important, I think. They're very handy to have, so have a good look at the slides. Most of the time you'll run into them. You can actually run execute JavaScript as well from your own code. That's quite easy. And often necessary. If I interact with Drupal these days, I always have the rich text editor. There's no easy way through the browser it's not an input field, so hard to interact with. So actually you have to call actual JavaScript on the page. So that happens a bit at the bottom where you see that execute script. So in my own steps, I can actually interact with the browser, execute JavaScript to do special things. To handle special drop-downs, special input fields. And this is very common. You'll notice that your tests stop working randomly, it appears at times. Very weird errors. Usually it's simply because you received a browser update. You need a new driver, so keep that in mind. If you get weird errors, update everything. Finally, to reap the full benefits for your company, because what happens obviously, the one-line change, how often have we not done that? I don't need to run all my tests. It's going to work. Continuous integration, you already saw that briefly, Travis, in the previous talk. To reap the full benefits for a company, you want to run your test automatically after every change. So when a change is committed, whatever you do, you use Travis or you have your own deployment systems, you run your tests, and there should be no failures. And actually, finally, think about these things. How often has become an unmaintained website? The gateway, Equifax, very famous recently. So as a company, you want to be sure your websites are maintained. That happens only if you have a test suite, which covers a lot of the code. As project managers, how far are we? Behat can help you there. If you extend or maintain a site as developers, you need to have a test so you can bring the system in a particular state or get particular things going, and then test from that point on. And documentation, obviously, for people after you and for the customer. So that's it for this. I suggest you read the first 6 chapters of the book. Afterwards, it gets very specific for Ruby, so that's not that interesting. Take the time to read the Drupal Behat extension page or guide, very good. And if you want to do Behat in your own company, feel free to contact me. Thank you.